Hey y'all. Welcome back to Black Ass Art History Presents. Y'all late to the revolution. This is still on chapter 3, Revelations in the Midst of Evolution, the Harlem Renaissance. And this section is called Jazz and Jubilee. Well, sort of. So again, Black Ass Art History is committed and dedicated to educating its audiences on a diaspora of melanated people with the intent to provide an honest and holistic history of our narratives. We are committed to ensuring our history and stories are not filtered through white supremacy indoctrination, dogma, and pseudo social science. I also do want to be transparent with this particular episode. It was a challenge preparing the music portion of the Harlem Renaissance because there is so much information and so many ways to tell this story. So I did my very best to try and consolidate that information. So this video is going to be longer than our usual 15 to 20 minutes. And if you feel like I did not capture everything, that is a great opportunity for you to research and explore as well. So again, jazz and jubilee, sort of. So when we think of Harlem, we not only think of Black excellence that emerges from the Harlem Renaissance through art and cultural production, we also think about this idea of the new Negro and the new Negro movement in this newly created Black Mecca in New York. But what really changes and shifts it is the soundtrack of it, where we now get to hear the blossoming and birth and genre of jazz be focused in New York, as well as the nightlife it brings, blending jazz, ragtime, and blues. So let's take a look at the Great Blues Migration. Here, what we see is the arrows show the actual migration patterns. And then what we have and the detail, either the vertical, diagonal, or horizontal lines, is a particular style of blues. So as we see that the blues made it same way as that migration to the Midwest, be it Chicago, St. Louis, or Kansas City, Missouri, in the south of Memphis, we would also see specifically the Mississippi Delta blues make its way to New York, juxtapose how the Piedmont style would actually go directly up along the coast. Again, this is just another infographic of the jazz history map. And as you notice, when we're looking at the yellow arrows, we do see that same pattern. We see it coming from New Orleans, either headed up the coast along the East Coast or going through the Midwest and then jumping over to New York. To give you a better visual of how jazz came to be, I found this amazing graphic that breaks down the flow of it. So, where it says ragtime at the top, that middle column is going to, or arrow, excuse me, is going to give you kind of like the evolution of jazz. Now, to the left of it, paralleling it, we have the blues along with the chronological order. So we see not only the evolution of jazz, but we see the evolution of blues and how that blues impacts and inspires the development of jazz. So let's learn about some of the individuals that would shape jazz as well as the blues in Harlem. These musicians, singers, composers come from a wide array of backgrounds, either economic or education. However, as Black folk, many have got their start in a traveling vaudeville show. Vaudeville shows were also known as minstrel shows, and it was a mixture of different acts: dance, comedy, music, singing, and playing. So honestly, just think of In Living Color. But back then, and more than often, they were segregated not only as shows, but even the circuit they travel, i.e., the Chitlin circuit. However, we will learn that the stories of how the blues, ragtime, and the South brought a unique expression which becomes a distinct African American sound on its own. And one of those people to bring it is Mr. Fletcher Henderson. He is an important contributor to big band and jazz swing. So his early upbringings, he comes from a middle-class Black family. Dad was a principal and mom's a teacher. He attended Atlanta University, which is now known as Clark Atlanta University, and he got his bachelor's in mathematics and science. He would later on go to receive his master's in chemistry. Now, initially, he moved to New York to pursue a PhD at Columbia. However, we don't know if he ever enrolled. What we do know is that his roommate was a pianist on a riverboat orchestra, which kind of drug him in. And he would also become a song demonstrator for Pace and Handy, so giving that samples of how music is played. And he would be formed the Black Swan band and be the house band for Club Album. Fletcher is also considered the architect of swing. His formula for swing was two specific sections, a saxophone section and a trumpet section. He convinced Louis Armstrong to leave Chicago and to come play in New York. He had helped bring improv jazz from places like New Orleans and the Carolinas to New York. Next, we have is William Christopher Handy, also W.C. Handy, who was born in Florence, Alabama. He always wanted to be a musician, and his father did not approve. There's a story that goes that said his father said he would rather follow him in a hearse than to see him be a musician. But that didn't stop Handy anyway. He saved his money and purchased a cornet, which is similar to a trumpet. By 1908, he moved to Memphis and wrote a song for E.H. Boss Crump, who at the time was running for mayor. This would later become the classic song Memphis Blues. He would play locally and then eventually moved to New York to start a music business with Pace. And then he also took his Memphis orchestra too. He would tour with Jelly Roll Morton, and he's also the author. He authored the Blues Anthology. Next, we have Louis Satchmo Armstrong. Born in New Orleans, he actually has an interesting beginning of his story. He was arrested at 12 years old for firing a gun in the street on New Year's Eve, which landed him into basically going to a reform house. Now, while he was at this reform house for boys, he actually learned to play the cornet. He became so successful at it that he became the reforms house band leader. And like many musicians, he would also play established band in cities like St. Louis. He would make his way to Chicago and play with the Creole Jazz Band. Then he would go to New York and play with the Black Swan Troubadour Band. Scat singing became a trademark. And this is just a quick example of his scatting. Just a quick example. So next we have Miss Ethel Waters. Ethel Waters is an openly queer Black woman who has many achievements, including being the first African American star in a radio show. She was born in Philadelphia. Waters had plenty challenges, especially her being born to a teen mom. So because she was born to a teen mom, she had a lot of time to herself and she really had a very free spirit. So free that as a teenager, she was known for her hip shimmy shake. In 1911, her life would change. On Halloween, her friends dared her to sing at an amateur night, and she ended up winning and was even given a job to perform there. By 1917, she was part of a vaudeville show and it was a dancer and singer. And then in 1921, she would move to New York and was signed to Black Swan Records. When she agreed to sing and sign with Black Swan Records and the Black Swan Troubadours, she proposition Pace said, "I'm not doing it unless I get $100 up front." He gave it to her. Her song Down Home Blues and Old Daddy would sell 500,000 copies at the time. Now, while on tour, they were hitting the Southern leg, and some band members would not go to the Jim Crow South. At the time, there was a federal anti lynching bill being considered due to the extreme number of lynchings that were happening. Not one to be intimidated, she continued that leg of the tour because she did not want to disappoint her fans. Columbia Records would sign her after Black Swan Records went under, and she recorded 50 songs in a couple of years. She did several Black music reviews. Again, similar to vaudeville, these were all Black shows that had acts singing, dancing, and skits. She would appear on television and film. She is known for her song Stormy Weather. In 1930s, on Broadway was Cabin in the Sky. And in 1950, she's nominated for an Academy Award as the Best Supporting Actress in the film Pinky. And this is probably one of my favorite clips from Cabin in the Sky. Next, we have Miss Bessie Smith. She was born in Chattanooga, Tennessee. We are still unaware if she was born in 1894 or not. Where she's from, they really didn't keep records of birth records of African Americans. However, Gertrude Mulroney Smith heard her sing in a review with the Rabbitfoot Minstrels and took her under her wing, and she toured with her in 1915. She would continue to tour and do vaudeville shows. And here's the other thing about these shows: they were either paid bare minimum, less than bare minimum, or nothing at all. So they were banking on hopefully getting discovered or better opportunities. In 1920, prohibition was in effect. However, she would sing in the speakeasy. One thing about Bessie that most people do know is she was known for her temper. Specifically, if she's had too much gin, she was likely to fight. By 1923, she moved to New York. Her first recording sold more than 750,000 copies. She became one of the highest paid Black entertainers. Back then, it was 1,500 to 2,000 a week. In 2024, with inflation, we're looking at about $36,000 a week. However, she did have critics. Overall, all blues and jazz music then. W.E.B. Du Bois felt the blues and jazz was lowbrow, that Black people must strive to excel to make more respectable music, like classical music. However, when the blues started to fade, she begins to switch to the genre of swing. Unfortunately, she would die due to an automobile accident. Next, we have James P. Johnson. He is the father of the stride piano. Essentially, what the stride is the right hand plays the melody, and then the left hand plays one note and one chord, and they will alternate between the one chord and the one note with the left. He was born in Brunswick, New Jersey. He worked for the QRS company as a piano roll recorder. Back then, pianos had music that had the little dots in it when you roll it and it played the music. That was his responsibility of making sure that they played right and also creating them. He played at rent parties, cabarets, and vaudeville circuits. In 1921, he recorded Carolina Shout. It is the first jazz piano solo ever recorded. In 1920s, he had wrote 11 Negro reviews, including the one that would lead to the dance craze, the Charleston. Sidebar: as if we don't know, the Charleston is actually based off traditional African and Caribbean dance movements from Black people in Charleston. In his life, Johnson would compose 19 symphonies, an opera where Langston Hughes created the lyrics, and the boogie woogie jazz that Fats Waller created with is because of his stride. Johnson lived to be 99 and would pass away 5 days short of his 100th birthday. Next, we have James Hubert Ubi Blake. His parents were actually enslaved, and he was born in Baltimore, Maryland. He was out with his mom one day, and I believe he wandered in a music store and began playing an organ. Mom just bought it. Mom was this very devout woman of God and believed that you don't waste God's gifts. That was until he started playing ragtime music. And at 15 years old, he got a job at playing the piano for a brothel. His mom found out through a church member. However, he was not forced to quit because he was making his own money. In 1899, he begins to write his music, and by 1908, he is the pianist of the Goldfield Hotel in Baltimore. Now, Blake would meet fellow songwriter Noble Sissel, and they would tour on the vaudeville circuit known as the Dixie Duo. They would meet writers Flournoy Miller and Aubrey Lyles, and they would birth what become an amazing musical called Shuffle Along, or the making of the musical sensation of 1921 and all that followed. Shuffle Along is a Black musical that impacted musical theater forever. It was written, produced, starring, and scored by an all Black cast, and it received amazing reviews as an all Black Broadway production. Songs such as I Am Just Wild About Harry was part of the score. Additionally, we would be introduced to the legends of Paul Robeson, Josephine Baker, Florence Mills, Freddie Washington, and Adelaide Hall. The premise is two men, Sam and Stephen, are running against each other for mayor. They agree that whoever wins, the other will become the chief of police. Stephen wins through some corruption, and Sam is chief of the police. Now, the comedy comes in because they argue over all the petty things. And then another opponent named Harry actually enters the mayoral race, and he wins. What is so amazing is that he had a total of 500. This musical had a total of 504 performances. He would continue on as jazz music began to shift. He would actually go on tour and perform for World War veterans and in the military. Unfortunately, his wife would die for tuberculosis and he kind of took a step back. However, in 1950, he actually enrolled in New York University and graduated with his bachelor's in music composition at the age of 67. James Bubber Miley. He is known for his muted trumpet and horn. He's also known for the jazz sound as jungle sound. Jungle sound basically is what white people's interpretation of what Black music should sound like. It should sound like the Dark Continent, it should sound exotic, and so forth. He played at white-only establishments, Connie's Inn and the Cottons Club, and he was part of Duke Ellington's orchestra. In 1931, he went on tour in the United States and Europe. Duke attributes the phrase that would become one of his most well-known songs to Miley. That is, it don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. Miley would compose over 2,000 works from musical comedies to ballet, 11 Grammys, 19 honorary degrees, 2 honorary doctorates, the U.S. Medal of Freedom, and the French Legion of Honor would all be awarded to him. Now, there are other impactful folks, but many of these we're pretty familiar with, such as Cab Calloway, known for his smile, his enthusiastic and extremely outrageous orchestra leadership. He played for the Savoy and the Cotton Club, and Cab Calloway was the first African American to have a syndicated radio show, as well as the first African American to sell 1 million records for his song Minnie the Moocher. Lady Day, Billie Holiday, whose life was no crystal stair, managed to sing one of the most impactful and powerful songs of the 20th century, Strange Fruit. Edward Kennedy Duke Ellington, the handsome and debonair musician whose orchestra had an impeccable sound simply because Duke wrote music that suited the strength of each of his band members. Dizzy Gillespie, the father of bebop jazz, and Ella Fitzgerald, known for her range and her uncanny ability to scat and sing through improvisation. So let's look at some places to be. This is a map drawn by African American artist Ether Sims Campbell. He often illustrated artwork for African American magazines and periodicals. The caricature like map highlights some of the well-known nightlife venues, such as the Cotton Club and Connor's Inn, both which for whites only performing Black Performing Club, Small Paradise, Savoy Ballroom, Radium Club, Club Hacha, Lafayette Theater, and many more, not to mention the numerous speakeasies during Prohibition, but we're going to dig into some of these other venues. Stomping at the Savoy, what is well known as the phrase of the night spot dance hall, the Savoy Ballroom. What makes the Savoy Ballroom interesting? It was one of the few integrated dance halls with an estimation of it being 85% Black and 15% white. It was located at 596 Lenox Avenue between 140th and 141st Street. Langston Hughes referred to it as the heartbeat of Harlem. It was owned by a white and Jewish partner. However, it was managed by an African American man named Charles Buchanan. The ballroom was modeled after one of the owner's other ballroom, known as the Roseland Ballroom. It had pink walls and it was lined with mirrors and was 10,000 square feet and could hold a capacity of 4,000 attendees. It had a double bandstand, one for a large orchestra and one for a medium sized orchestra. So throughout the night, the orchestras were alternating playing music, so the music was nonstop. This is also home to Lindy Hoppers, which is a very unique dance that is still popular and preserved today. So between 1920s and 1940s, they had an estimated annual profit of $250,000. So if we factor in inflation for 2024, that's anywhere between 4.3 million to 5.5 million a year. And ticket prices were at such. It's no different from the venues today. If you got there before 6 p.m., it was 30 cents, or today, $7.50. After 6 p.m., it was 65 cents. Today, $11. And after 8 p.m., it was 85 cents. So roughly $1,500 today. Bouncers actually wore tuxedos and were paid $100 a night cash. The hostesses would teach you how to dance. And if you paid 25 cents for a dance ticket, you can have a hostess as your dance partner for the evening. Small Paradise opened in 1925, and it was the only known, although there might have been others, African American owned and operated jazz night lounge. It was also the only integrated jazz venue. We don't know much about its owner and founder, Edward Alexander Smalls. We do know that he did migrate from Charleston, South Carolina to New York. But not only was Small Paradise known for the music and the big names, but it was also known for its ambiance, the food, the service, and the overall hospitality. Other venues include the Lenox Lounge. It was a long-standing bar that hosted jazz greats. The Apollo Theater, although it was not originally for African Americans, it was a burlesque theater for the whites that opened in 1913. By 1934, new ownership took over and it became a venue marketed to the Black community with amateur night, concerts, even drag shows as well. Lastly, there's also the Renaissance Casino Ballroom, and it was a Black owned establishment. And then lastly, we have Alhambra Ballroom. But not all these places welcome Black folks as patrons, just as entertainment. However, if you didn't want to go to these big venues, you could always hit up a rent party. Rent parties is an African American creation that's not only for a means of survival, but it provided joy and jubilee in our communities. Due to the housing crisis and population, landlords continuously raise rents. So people would have rent parties to help make that monthly payment. So rent parties either happen on Thursdays because that's the day that the domestic workers got paid, or Saturdays. That's when the laborers got paid. Would be the nights of those parties. They would hire a musician. Sometime a band would play music and folks. And I'm talking Fats Waller, Johnson. Some of the names that we just learned about would still attend these rent parties. The tickets would have these playful, sometimes salacious sayings to entice folks to come on out. Then they would have what's known as cutting contests. So this would be when the pianists would challenge each other and get on the piano to see who could outdo and improv one another. So if we look at some of the ones where Black folks weren't welcome, we're going to take a look at the Cotton Club, even though that's the most popular one we know. And however, before it was a Cotton Club, it was called Club Deluxe, and it was owned by boxing champion Jack Johnson in 1920. However, by 1923, mob boss and bootlegger Oni Madden would take over as ownership. Now, Jack Johnson would be allowed to manage. However, we can tell it was specifically for white folks. Madden wanted to make sure that in Black Harlem's, white folks felt welcome. For example, the murals and decor of the entire club is to look like a southern plantation with fields of cotton. Even the menu that's on your right has the cotton bowls at the top with the Sambo like characters and then a dignified white woman. Not to mention, All the chorus girls had to be, and I quote in Madden's own words, tall, thin, and tan, and they were forced to wear very skimpy outfits. Now, Duke at the time was the house orchestra, and then later Cab Calloway would be, when he was highly encouraged to play jazz music that was jungle music. Another whites only establishment was founded by the Emmerman siblings. It was a sister and two brothers. Now, it only lasted for 3 years. It opened in 1923 and in 1927. Like the Cotton Club, it was whites only, black entertainers. However, their admission was steep. It was $2.50 back then. So that's $44 today. And not many black people, and so not many black people bands would even play there as well unless they really needed it. So there were really frustrated with these white only establishments like Connie's and the Cotton Club, and some even wanted to integrate those spaces. Unfortunately, there were the Harlem Renaissance writers and other black folks that felt like that, white people from lower Manhattan were coming to see what the Negroes do. And because of that, it caused traffic. There would be fighting, and then racial tension would also exist there. Several writers and creators of the Harlem Renaissance would even critique their ideas and express them through work as well. So let's do a recap. The sounds of the South of blues would be the key to creating a distinct African American sound to become known as jazz. Many of our jazz greats, despite their economic or education background, played the vaudeville circuit, the chitlet circuit, and reviews. However, they would lift each other as they climbed through mentorships and so forth. Black musicians pushed the envelope and created a sound that influenced the world, even though some Black folk were led by respectability politics to have Black people emulate whiteness. However, Black people were able to make spaces to tell their stories through dance, melody, movement, sound, and compositions. Thank you all for watching, and stay tuned for the next episode, which will be the last one for this chapter when we look at the visual art of the Harlem Renaissance artists.